Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, February 14, 2024. Vice President JD Vance meets Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at the Munich Security Conference in Germany to discuss efforts to end Ukraine's war with Russia. We'll also hear from U.S. senators from both parties at the conference and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth in Poland about the Russia-Ukraine peace talks. Vice President Vance gives a speech at the Munich Security Conference in which he criticizes European leaders for failing to uphold democratic values, saying they are violating the right of free speech and allowing uncontrolled immigration. New York City Mayor Eric Adams goes on Fox News with Border Czar Tom Homan talking about whether the Justice Department moving to dismiss corruption charges against him have anything to do with his cooperation with the federal authorities on immigration enforcement. National Transportation Safety Board Chair Jennifer Homendy says the crew of the helicopter that collided with a passenger plane near Reagan National Airport, killing all 67 people on both aircraft, may not have heard the instruction to pass behind the plane. President Donald Trump signs an executive order withholding federal money from any school or college that has a COVID-19 vaccine mandate, and the House Budget Committee passes a budget resolution that will enact the president's agenda on tax cuts, spending cuts, immigration, and energy. Associated Press reports that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Friday during a meeting with U.S. Vice President JD Vance that his country wants security guarantees before any talks to end the Ukraine-Russia war. Shortly before sitting down with Vance at the Munich Security Conference, Zelensky said he will only agree to meet in person with Russian leader Vladimir Putin after a common plan is negotiated with U.S. President Donald Trump. Trump upended years of steadfast U.S. support for Ukraine this week following a phone call with Putin when he said the two leaders would likely meet soon to negotiate a peace deal. Trump later seemed to accept Zelensky's demand that he, too, have a seat at the table. That was from the Associated Press article. Vice President Vance and President Zelensky spoke for a few minutes before their meeting in Germany.
Good afternoon, everybody. We're, of course, happy to welcome the Ukrainian delegation led by President Zelensky. We had a number of fruitful conversations, a number of things for us to follow up and work on. And fundamentally, the goal is, as President Trump outlined it, we want the war to come to a close. We want the killing to stop, but we want to achieve a durable, lasting peace, not the kind of peace that's going to have Eastern Europe in conflict just a couple years down the road. So we had a number of good conversations about how we might accomplish that together, and certainly we'll have many more in the days, weeks, and months to come. President Zelensky.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Very briefly, I think Vice President said everything and absolutely correct. We are very thankful for American support. President Trump, we have good conversation today. Our first meeting, not last, I'm sure, and really what we need to speak more, to work more, and to prepare the plan how to stop Putin and finish the war. We want peace very much, but we need real security guarantees, and we will continue our meetings and our work, and we will be very happy to see General Kalak also in Ukraine in this closest time. Thank you, Vice President, for meeting. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you all. Take care, guys.
How does this move forward if Ukraine is not ready to come to the table with Putin? If Ukraine is not ready to speak with Putin at the table, how do you move forward? Will you still negotiate?
Well, look, I think the way that this conversation moves us forward is, first of all, you have great members of the Ukrainian delegation. You have our incredible Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, here. We have General Kellogg. It's important for us to get together and start to have the conversations that are going to be necessary to bring this thing to a close. That's all I'm going to say for now, because I want to preserve the optionality here from the negotiators and our respective teams to bring this thing to a responsible close. Thank you all and have a good night.
What is the timeline of this meeting? Have you come to a deal on
I actually can't hear you when you all shout at once. See you guys. Have a good night.
Vice President JD Vance and the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at the Munich Security Conference in Germany. Vice President Vance accused the Wall Street Journal of twisting his words in an interview in which it was reported he said the option of sending U.S. troops to Ukraine if Russian President Vladimir Putin does not negotiate in good faith to reach a peace deal is still on the table. Vice President writing on X, the fact that the Wall Street Journal twisted my words in the way they did for this story is absurd, but not surprising considering they have spent years pushing for more American sons and daughters in uniform to be unnecessarily deployed overseas. As we've always said, American troops should never be put into harm's way where it doesn't advance American interest and security. This war is between Russia and Ukraine. That statement from Vice President JD Vance. Ukrainian President Zelensky also took part in a panel discussion with U.S. senators at the Security Conference, during which he said, with all the talk of President Trump not wholeheartedly supporting Ukraine joining the NATO military alliance, former President Joe Biden was not really in support either.
My first phone call with the President Biden, and my first question, will we be in NATO? He said, no. And I said, we will see. And then we had more meetings, more questions, but be very honest, United States, they never saw us in NATO. They just spoke about it. But they really didn't want us in NATO. It's true.
Ukrainian President Zelensky at the Munich Security Conference on a panel with 4 U.S. senators, 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. In all, more than a dozen U.S. senators made the trip to Germany for the conference. One of those senators with Zelensky is Sheldon Whitehous, Democrat of Rhode Island, who said there is still deep support in the Senate to support Ukraine against Russia's invasion.
Does a peace deal need to go back to the borders in 2014, the same borders?
I think the peace deal needs to be something that this gentleman right here can sign proudly, and that, first of all, does justice to what happened to Ukraine. Just between Russia and Ukraine, the deal needs to provide that justice for Ukraine. Second, it needs to be structured in such a way that it sends a message that there is no next Ukraine, that Russia does not just move on to another country to play the same script. And the third thing is we need to set it up in such a way that when China is looking at this outcome and they look over at Taiwan, they think, maybe not such a great idea. And there's one thing I feel obliged to add, because we are Codell McCain. We still keep John's name. Partly that's out of affection, but partly it's out of honoring his commitment to hold fast to the Atlantic Alliance. And what I want people here to know is that, at least for the Senate, there is strong majority, super majority, in favor of supporting Ukraine, seeing this through, making sure this does not come off as a win for Putin and embolden him further. And while you will hear, obviously, other voices, there is a strong, big core of people like Dick Blumenthal, who's been in 6 times to Kiev to, battle for this. There is a very strong reservoir of determination in the Senate to see this through, and it is a bipartisan reservoir of determination.
Senator Sheldon Whitehous, Democrat from Rhode Island, on a panel at the Munich Security Conference in Germany. He referred to Codell McCain, that's congressional delegation, the name for the late Senator John McCain, Republican from Arizona. New York Times writes that Senator Roger Wicker, Republican of Mississippi, and the chair of the panel that oversees the Pentagon, criticized Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth for recent remarks about Ukraine's future, saying the newly confirmed secretary made a rookie mistake by ruling out a return to the country's pre-war borders. Mr. Wicker, who helped salvage Mr. Hegseth's chances of confirmation last month amid Republican resistance, made the remarks in interviews with Politico in response to comments Mr. Hegseth made earlier this week during a trip to Brussels. The secretary said that NATO membership for Ukraine was unrealistic and that the country should abandon its hopes of reclaiming territory taken by Russia. The comments prompted immediate backlash, forcing Mr. Hegseth to clarify his position a day later when he told reporters that everything is on the table in any peace negotiation between Russia and Ukraine. Reporting from the New York Times, here is Senator Wicker interviewed by Jonathan Martin, Politico Politics Bureau Chief and Senior Columnist.
So you prefer to keep supplying Ukraine with military aid rather than move to a negotiated peace?
Thank you for letting me clarify that. I'm absolutely comfortable with talks being held.
Okay.
But not just any deal. not just any deal to stop the fighting. And I'll tell you, I wouldn't make any permanent decision on national boundaries. We might freeze them where they are now. I don't think we've made a permanent decision with North Korea on boundaries. It's temporary. It's been there for 70 years or 60 years. But I wouldn't concede anything permanently. But if we can stop the fighting and have a several-year period where where things stay in place, and maybe some procedure to let actually these 21st century human beings make the same decision that you and I get to make about who runs their life and runs their country. That might be a start, but you look, everybody knows, and you know, and people in the administration know, you don't say before your first meeting what you will agree to and what you won't agree to.
Yeah, I was puzzled by that too.
Yeah, well, I was puzzled too, and I was disturbed. I was disturbed by it.
Senator Roger Wicker, Republican from Mississippi and chair of the Armed Services Committee, with Politico reporter Jonathan Martin at the Munich Security Conference in Munich, Germany. The conference started in 1963. Its motto is peace through dialogue. Story from Fox News: an alleged drone struck the protective shell covering the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine early Friday, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is pointing the finger at Russia. This came up at a joint news conference today with U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and the Polish Defense Minister in Warsaw. They were also asked about the Ukraine war peace talks.
Do you believe the warnings from NATO allies that allowing Putin to keep Ukrainian territory will one day embolden him to launch future attacks or perhaps even invade the eastern flank of the NATO alliance? Is this Yalta 2.0 or perhaps even Munich 2.0? Do you trust Vladimir Putin to live up to any potential agreement? And finally, in light of the Russian drone attack on Chernobyl last night, should there be a ceasefire during these negotiations? Thank you.
Do you want to go? Go ahead.
Well, what I believe is the strength which protects us from evil. Only strong we are able to defend ourselves from Putin. Only strength deters in our freedom. Our freedom will not be protected by beautiful words, by diplomatic meetings. Our freedom and independence will be only defended and protected by the strength of our alliance. This is the only thing that can protect us, nothing else, and we'll never have a calm day. There are no calm days across the world. There are only those who have slept the last 30 years, because they thought that they lived in the calm world. The world will never be calm. The world will also always require from us activity. We always need to invest that. We have to remember that Putin or other dictator may come which can threaten our security. It never ends. This is what history teaches us, and I think it was a bit too good for us. For some it was too good. Maybe they didn't have the experiences that we've had in Poland, that they just slept over this time, and right now it's time to wake them up. And the voice which came from Brussels, from Pete Hegseth, more spending, was finally heard. We've been talking about it, we've been showing that, and we need it. Not to replace the American troops in Europe, because without them the world and Europe will not be safe, but to maintain them, to keep them. Europe must show that they want it, not in the words but in the deeds, and many European countries is already doing that, but many more needs to do it, and we want to do it. So there's no other security guarantee than your strength.
Well, I appreciate those words, and I agree. First, your second question on a ceasefire. I think the president has stated that that could be part of a good faith aspect at the beginning of negotiations, which the president's goal is to stop the killing, end the violence and the death. Part of doing that could be a ceasefire, and that could be a welcome development. As far as Vladimir Putin being emboldened, he's going to declare victory no matter what. You can expect that no matter what the outcome is. Thankfully, the bravery of the Ukrainians and allies that came alongside them, especially early in the war, deterred and defeated Vladimir Putin from achieving what he wanted, which was all of Ukraine. So now you have a more defined front line, and whether he declares victory or not will be up to him. Whether he's emboldened it speaks exactly to what the Deputy Prime Minister talked about and NATO's willingness to step up. If NATO's response to this situation is to truly increase capabilities, truly increase inputs and spending, to think more like Poland, to think more like the Baltics, who are closer to the threat and recognize the reality of the threat, then I don't think Vladimir Putin will be emboldened by this outcome. It'll be a recognition that the collective ability of the West to deter him was something that actually happened. Is there trust there? No. I mean, you don't have to operate under a position of trust in order to negotiate a deal. But again, I'm the Secretary of Defense. It's not my job to read the mind of Vladimir Putin. President Trump will be the one at the table with Zelensky and Putin. You don't have to trust somebody in order to negotiate with them. But as Ronald Reagan said, if you don't trust, you need to verify. And so there will be a follow-up in ensuring that whatever peace is negotiated is a lasting and enduring peace.
U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth in Warsaw, Poland, a joint news conference with the Polish defense minister, who's also the Deputy Prime Minister, Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz. Secretary Hegseth also asked about U.S. troop levels in Europe and said the American troop levels on the continent are important. What happens 5, 10, 15 years from now is part of a larger discussion that reflects the threat level, America's posture, our needs around the globe, but most importantly, the capability of European countries to step up. That's why our message is so stark to our European allies, and now is the time to invest, because you can't make an assumption that America's presence will last forever. This is Washington Today. Returning to the Munich Security Conference in Germany, Voice of America reports that Vice President JD Vance warned European allies attending the conference against the threat from within, arguing that European governments are exercising extreme censorship and have failed to adequately get a handle on out-of-control migration. The article says the remarks came as a surprise to the audience of leaders and top officials who were expecting Vance to focus on Ukraine and Russia. The vice president only made a passing remark on the issue. Here's part of the speech talking about free speech.
Already in my conversations, and I've had many, many great conversations with many people gathered here in this room, I've heard a lot about what you need to defend yourselves from. And of course, that's important. But what has seemed a little bit less clear to me, and certainly I think to many of the citizens of Europe, is what exactly it is that you're defending yourselves for. What is the positive vision that animates this shared security compact that we all believe is so important? And I believe deeply that there is no security if you are afraid of the voices, the opinions, and the conscience that guide your very own people. Europe faces many challenges, but the crisis this continent faces right now, the crisis I believe we all face together, is one of our own making. If you're running in fear of your own voters, there is nothing America can do for you. Nor, for that matter, is there anything that you can do for the American people who elected me and elected President Trump. You need democratic mandates to accomplish anything of value in the coming years. Have we learned nothing that thin mandates produce unstable results? But there is so much of value that can be accomplished with the kind of democratic mandate that I think will come from being more responsive to the voices of your citizens. If you're going to enjoy competitive economies, if you're going to enjoy affordable energy and secure supply chains, then you need mandates to govern, because you have to make difficult choices to enjoy all of these things. And of course, we know that very well in America. You cannot win a democratic mandate by censoring your opponents or putting them in jail, whether that's the leader of the opposition, a humble Christian praying in her own home, or a journalist trying to report the news.
Vice President JD Vance speech at the Munich Security Conference in Munich, Germany. He also said European security is being undermined by mass migration.
And of all the pressing challenges that the nations represented here face, I believe there is nothing more urgent than mass migration. Today, almost 1 in 5 people living in this country moved here from abroad. That is, of course, an all-time high. It's a similar number, by the way, in the United States, also an all-time high. The number of immigrants who entered the EU from non-EU countries doubled between 2021 and 2022 alone, and of course, it's gotten much higher since. And we know this situation, it didn't materialize in a vacuum. It's the result of a series of conscious decisions made by politicians all over the continent and others across the world over the span of a decade. We saw the horrors wrought by these decisions yesterday in this very city. And of course, I can't bring it up again without thinking about the terrible victims who had a beautiful winter day in Munich ruined. Our thoughts and prayers are with them and will remain with them. But why did this happen in the first place? It's a terrible story, but it's one we've heard way too many times in Europe and unfortunately too many times in the United States as well. An asylum seeker, often a young man in his mid-20s, already known to police, rams a car into a crowd and shatters a community. How many times must we suffer these appalling setbacks before we change course and take our shared civilization in a new direction? No voter on this continent went to the ballot box to open the floodgates to millions of unvetted immigrants. But you know what they did vote for? In England, they voted for Brexit, and agree or disagree, they voted for it. And more all over Europe, they're voting for political leaders who promise to put an end to out-of-control migration.
Vice President JD Vance at the Munich Security Conference in Germany. AP writes that he met with the leader of a German far-right party during a visit to Munich on Friday, 9 days before a German election, and after lecturing European leaders about the state of democracy. He said there's no place for firewalls. Vance met with Alice Weidel, the co-leader and candidate for chancellor of the far-right and anti-immigrant Alternative for Germany party, his office said. And Germany's defense minister, Boris Pistorius, rejecting Vance's characterization of European policies, saying, if I understand him correctly, he is comparing conditions in parts of Europe with those in authoritarian regions. That is not acceptable. This is Washington Today. From BBC News, New York City Mayor Eric Adams has denied claims that he asked the Trump administration to drop a corruption case against him in exchange for enforcing the president's immigration agenda. Speaking on Fox News, alongside Trump's Border Czar Tom Homan, Adams rejected the idea that a quid pro quo had occurred, calling it silly. His remarks come a day after the top prosecutor in Manhattan, Danielle Sassoon, resigned from her post, claiming the Justice Department was pressuring her to drop criminal charges against Adams. Her decision to quit triggered a flurry of other resignations within the Justice Department. That was from BBC News. Here is Mayor Adams on Fox News this morning.
The U.S. attorney here in New York City, the Southern District, she quit yesterday, the acting U.S. attorney. And so did 5 members of the Department of Justice because they felt like being forced by the Department of Justice to drop the corruption charges was inappropriate and they should not have asked. And what she said was, she said, you offered to help with the migration problem and the immigration agenda in exchange for the case being dropped.
Think about that. Think about that. Think about my attorney, Alex Spira, one of the top trial attorneys in the country. Imagine him going inside saying that the only way Mayor Adams is going to assist in immigration, which I was calling for since 2022, right, is if you drop the charges. That's quid pro quo. That's a crime. It took her 3 weeks to report in front of her a criminal action. Right. Come on, this is silly.
New York City Mayor Eric Adams, a Democrat on Fox News Channel this morning. He later put out a statement. I want to be crystal clear with New Yorkers. I never offered, nor did anyone offer on my behalf, any trade of my authority as your mayor for an end to my case. Never. I am solely beholden to the 8.3 million New Yorkers that I represent, and I will always put this city first. Now we must put this difficult episode behind us so that trust can be restored, New York can move forward, and we can continue delivering for the people of this city. Statement from Mayor Eric Adams. Sitting beside the mayor on the Fox News set was the Trump administration's Border Czar Tom Homan, who said that he will be making sure the mayor lives up to his agreement to cooperate on federal immigration matters.
If he doesn't come through, I'll be back in New York City, and we won't be sitting on the couch. I'll be in his office, up his butt, saying, "Where the hell is the agreement we came to?" So,
I want ICE to deliver. And I want ICE to deliver. We're going to deliver for the safety of the people of this city. Let's focus on every American and New Yorker should have the right to have an opportunity and survive in this city.
We're going to hold you to that.
On Fox News this morning, New York City Mayor Eric Adams and Trump administration Border Czar Tom Homan. President Trump himself was asked about the developments in the Eric Adams case and helping out on the immigration matters. The president was in the White House Oval Office.
The lead prosecutor in Eric Adams' case resigned today, saying anyone who didn't press forward would be a coward. What's your reaction to that and to the overall implication that politics were at play here?
Well, I don't know about it. I mean, obviously I'm not involved in that, but I would say this, that if they had a problem, and these are mostly people from the previous administration, you understand, so they weren't going to be there anyway. They were going to all be gone or dismissed. If not, they know on Tuesday they're all being dismissed. You know, the whole country is being, because what you do is you come in and you put new people in. So when you say resign, they're going to be gone anyway. But I know nothing about the individual case. I know that they didn't feel it was much of a case. They also felt that it was unfair with the election. Look, I would know that better than anybody because I was weaponized more than any human being in the history probably of the world. And I won the election in a landslide, winning all 7 swing states, winning the popular vote and everything else because the people got it. It was weaponized, and I was weaponized literally weeks before the election. But I think there's also something to be said. I read that. There's something to be said for what they were doing. It looked to me to be very political. But why didn't they bring this up like 4 or 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, or whenever it happened? You know, they just sat around and didn't complain. Then all of a sudden they complain, and they know they're all being dismissed anyway. So, you know, that's the way it is.
President Donald Trump in the White House Oval Office taking reporters' questions. Story from NPR. Multiple immigration and customs enforcement officers have been granted access to information in a database on unaccompanied children who crossed the border into the United States, in line with the first Trump administration's policies, which were revoked by the president's successor. In an email to staff obtained by NPR, the acting director of the Office of Refugee Resettlement said upcoming changes were necessary to build a culture of child safety and accountability. But advocates say they fear the administration will use it for immigration enforcement against some of the families illegally in the country that take in the children. That was from NPR. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Democracy. It isn't just an idea, it's a process shaped by leaders elected to the highest offices and entrusted to a select few with guarding its basic principles. It's where debates unfold, decisions are made, and the nation's course is charted. Democracy in real time. This is your government at work. This is C-SPAN, giving you your democracy unfiltered.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. From Associated Press, the crew of the helicopter that collided mid-air with an American Airlines jet near Washington, D.C.'s Ronald Reagan National Airport might not have heard instructions from the air traffic controller to pass behind the plane, investigators said Friday. National Transportation Safety Board Chairwoman Jennifer Homendy said the recording from the Black Hawk helicopter cockpit suggests the crew may have missed the key instruction just before the January 29th collision, in which all 67 aboard the 2 aircraft were killed. That was from AP. Chair Homendy held a news conference at NTSB headquarters in Washington, D.C.
At 8:47:42, or 17 seconds before impact, a radio transmission from the tower was audible on both CVRs, directing the Black Hawk to pass behind the CRJ. CVR data from the Black Hawk indicated that the portion of the transmission that stated "pass behind the" may not have been received by the Black Hawk crew. Transmission was stepped on by a 0.8-second mic key from the Black Hawk. The Black Hawk was keying the mic to communicate with ATC.
NTSB Chair Jennifer Homendy at today's news conference. Again, from the AP article, Homendy said the helicopter was on a check flight that night when the pilot was being tested on the use of night vision goggles and flying by instruments. Investigators believe the crew was wearing night vision goggles throughout the flight. More from today's news conference.
Do I understand correctly, you're looking into the possibility that there may have been bad data and therefore inaccurate readings inside the cockpit of the chopper for altitude for the pilots to read?
That's correct. We are looking at the possibility of there may be bad data. We're looking at, were they seeing something different in the cockpit that differs from the FDR data, which was radio altimeter?
In other words, they may have thought they're at one altitude when in truth they were at a different altitude.
It's possible, but we have a lot of work to do till we get to that. Pete.
How critical is the finding that the crew could have been wearing night vision goggles, and how much will that factor into your investigation?
So the question is, how critical is the finding that the crew could have been wearing night vision goggles? That is, part of our investigation where it's going to be a factor in our visibility study. We're going to have to see what was possible for them to see at the time leading up to the collision and the accident sequence.
Is there anything in the voice recorder indicating that the crew of the Blackhawk saw the impending collision?
Is there anything in the voice recorder that the crew of the Blackhawk could see or tell that there was an impending collision? We do not have any indication that the Blackhawk crew would have seen that.
Jennifer Homendy, chair of the NTSB, National Transportation Safety Board, at today's news conference in Washington on the results of the preliminary investigation. Story from ABC News. President Donald Trump on Friday signed an executive order that would strip schools of federal aid if they mandate COVID vaccines. A largely symbolic move, considering that no states currently require them. The order applies to students and not to teachers or staff. In a fact sheet provided to reporters, the White House said the order was necessary because COVID vaccine mandates were threatening educational opportunities for students. The White House wrote, parents are being forced into a difficult position, comply with a controversial mandate, or risk their child's educational future. The article says some states and cities had proposed COVID vaccine mandates after the pandemic, including California, but quickly dropped them due to pushback from parents. Reporting from ABC News, President Trump signed this executive order in the White House Oval Office.
We'll be signing an executive order having to do with COVID and schools. Lindsay?
Yep. So this first executive order, it prohibits federal funding for COVID-19 mandates, vaccine mandates in schools.
Okay, and that will meaning they want to clear that up,
Yep.
the discrepancy.
So any schools that require students to be vaccinated with COVID-19 shot, then there's no more federal funding. So.
Okay. Okay, that solves that problem.
Sir, will the Department of Education have to handle that?
Yes, it'll go through the Department of Education. Okay? Thanks.
President Donald Trump in the White House Oval Office. Again, from the ABC News article, one open question is whether the new administration could opt to go beyond COVID vaccines and put pressure on schools to drop requirements for other vaccines. Currently, all 50 states mandate that students receive certain vaccinations, including to prevent the measles. Many states, however, offer religious exemptions. President Trump also signed an executive order today establishing his Energy Council, led by Interior Secretary Doug Burgum and Energy Secretary Chris Wright, to, in the president's words, achieve energy dominance. The Republican-controlled House Budget Committee, begins an NBC News article, voted along party lines to advance a massive budget blueprint to slash taxes and spending by trillions of dollars. The vote of 21-16 after a marathon day-long session sends the budget resolution to the full House, where Republicans must unify their paper-thin majority to approve it, and instructs committees to craft a massive package to pass President Donald Trump's agenda on immigration, taxes, and more. The budget calls for up to $4.5 trillion in new deficits through tax cuts, which Republicans plan to use to extend Trump's expiring 2017 tax law and pass other pieces of his tax agenda. It calls for $1.5 trillion in spending cuts with an additional caveat. The House package has to include $2 trillion in cuts to the mandatory part of federal spending, which covers programs like Medicare, Medicaid, and food benefits known as SNAP, or $4.5 trillion amount in tax breaks must be reduced by a commensurate amount. That was the summary from the NBC News article about the markup that took place on Thursday. Republican and Democratic leaders of the House Budget Committee making final comments Thursday night before that vote to approve the budget resolution. Democrat Brendan Boyle of Pennsylvania went first.
Despite all the sacrifices really our families make, we are honored to be here. We are here at a moment and on a committee where it matters, where our votes matter and where our voices matter. And on this side of the dais, we wouldn't have fought so hard over the last 12 hours, offering more than 30 amendments to prevent this extreme Republican budget from wreaking havoc on working families. Each of our amendments was a direct effort to shield the American people from the reckless cuts embedded in this proposal. Cuts that will hurt the most vulnerable while giving trillions of dollars of handouts to the ultra-rich. We fought to protect Medicaid and Medicare, ensuring that seniors, low-income families, children, and people with disabilities don't see their health care stripped away. We fought to safeguard sensitive taxpayer data, an issue that has become even more urgent now that Elon Musk has been given access to IRS records, raising serious concerns about privacy and abuse of power. We worked to preserve the ACA tax credits, which allow millions of Americans to afford health coverage, and to defend Social Security, a bedrock promise that ensures retirees can live with dignity after a lifetime of work. Beyond health care and retirement security, we also sought to protect students, educators, workers, and veterans from these devastating cuts that are in this budget. We proposed amendments to maintain funding for public education, ensuring that schools remain adequately resourced and that teachers don't bear the burden of budget shortfalls. And we stood up for veterans who risked their lives for this country and deserve more than empty rhetoric. They deserve fully funded health care, food assistance, and the benefits they earned through their service. Yet despite the clear benefits of these proposals, Republicans oppose all of them. Instead of choosing to protect the American people, they chose to protect billionaires and corporations. As we close, my fellow Democrats, I am proud to stand with you, united in our commitment to fight for working families. Because let's be clear about what is at stake. House Republicans are once again betraying the middle class of this country and those who aspire to be in it. We need to resoundingly, overwhelmingly, and unitedly say no to this Republican betrayal.
Congressman Brendan Boyle, Democrat from Pennsylvania, ranking member on the Budget Committee, Thursday night at the end of a day-long markup of the budget resolution. He was followed by the committee's chair, Jody Arrington, Republican of Texas.
In this last election, the American people overwhelmingly supported President Trump and gave Republicans control of both chambers of Congress. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised because they were sick and tired of watching their sovereign nation be invaded. They were sick and tired of watching what was $8 trillion in deficit spending by my colleagues on some of the things that were mentioned here today that are absolutely ludicrous. And all the while, they had inflation burning a hole in their pocketbooks, and they were having to rein in their spending, change their habits, make sacrifices. They saw our nation lose respect on the global stage. They saw that weakness in fact invites aggression, and they saw the instability and how dangerous it is to have feckless foreign policy and a commander-in-chief with a weak posture. We were being taken advantage of. They got a taste of what it was like to live in a country that did not have any respect for the rule of law, lawlessness, chaos, crime-ridden streets in once great cities. And I'm just so confident that the American people are for us. I make no excuses. I couldn't be more proud to be an American, to be a leader for this country, to be an elected official. I'm humbled by it. I'm honored to serve alongside some warriors who are willing to lean into this. They know this, that they will be mischaracterized, as will our policies. And they know there will be a political cost to some extent, because you just can't explain, you just don't have enough time to explain what you're trying to do to steward tax dollars and protect beneficiaries because of some of the money siphoned off from the intended benefit. But they're willing to do it. We've talked about our children being at home while we're here working and serving. Man, this is for our kids. This is for the next generation of Americans. The true voiceless people, the true voiceless folks who don't have a seat at the table while the debt continues to climb, $2 trillion in the gap this year, $4 trillion in 10. We're in a debt spiral, and I pray we can get out of it. But if we can, this is the last best shot to do it. And we know there's enormous waste and opportunity to right-size this bloated government of the American people.
Congressman Jody Arrington, Republican from Texas, Budget Committee Chair, Thursday night before the committee voted to approve the budget resolution 21-16. Key feature of it is the budget reconciliation process, which cannot be filibustered in the Senate, so it could pass with only Republican votes there. The top four House Republican leaders, the Speaker, Majority Leader, Whip, and Conference Chair, put out a joint statement. This is the start of the process, and we remain laser-focused on ultimately sending a bill to President Trump's desk, which, among other things, secures the border, keeps taxes low for families and job creators, restores American energy dominance, and makes government work better for all Americans. Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, Democrat from Massachusetts, put out a press release on Wednesday. Today, as the nation witnesses an unprecedented onslaught against diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, initiatives from the Trump administration, Congresswoman Pressley and Senator Cory Booker, Democrat of New Jersey, are announcing the reintroduction of H.R. 40, legislation to establish a federal commission to examine the lasting legacy of slavery and develop reparations proposals for African American descendants of enslaved people. The bill, which comes during Black History Month, is a powerful counterweight to the harmful actions taken by Donald Trump and a call to action for America to address the systemic oppression of Black people throughout its history. That was the press release from Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. She held a news conference with other members of the Congressional Black Caucus about this bill.
Today, with Donald Trump and Republicans waging their coordinated and at times unlawful assault on Black folks and Black history, we will not allow that history to be erased. We will not allow it to be whitewashed. H.R. 40 is a powerful reminder of the work that remains and offers us a pathway toward truth, reconciliation, and accountability. To be clear, this bill is not a symbolic gesture, but rather a meaningful step toward repairing the deep structural injustices that continue to harm Black communities today. The racial wealth gap in America is not an accident. In Boston, my home city, the Federal Reserve counts Black wealth at just $8, compared to the wealth of white households at $247,500. Nationwide, the racial wealth gap is over $10 trillion. That's trillion with a T. This shameful reality is the direct result of generations of precise, intentional policy harm codified into our laws and budgets. And it is specifically the result of slavery and the anti-Black society that followed. From Jim Crow to redlining to mass incarceration, our government, through policies and budgets, has perpetuated and entrenched these harms for generations. The disparities that we see in health outcomes, housing, education, wealth, and more are by design. Today, our government has a moral and legal obligation to right those wrongs, and reparations are a necessary step towards achieving justice. Now, here's what the bill would do. H.R. 40 creates a federal commission, an expert body charged with investigating the enduring impacts of slavery and its aftermath and developing concrete proposals for reparations. This is a pragmatic policy that is fundamentally about repairing harm and building a more just America.
Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, Democrat from Massachusetts, at a news conference on Wednesday. The bill has the designation H.R. 40, a reference to the promise of giving former slaves 40 acres and a mule. The bill was first introduced by Congressman John Conyers, Democrat of Michigan, in 1989, and when he retired in 2017, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, Democrat of Texas, took over as the lead sponsor. She passed away last year. Wall Street today, the Dow down 165, NASDAQ up 81, S&P down a fraction. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. There will be no Washington Today on Monday, President's Day. We'll return on Tuesday. Have a good night and weekend.